The age of exposure of kids to spicy materials online is getting younger, and it will only get more inviting from here. Let's get into it. Before we go further, my name is Casey, and I have been a therapist for more than 13 years, a husband, father of 4, and I am concerned that as technology advances, so too will the use of spicy materials online, and that will become a problem for us and for future generations.
In America, the average American man spends 8 years of his life in escapist entertainment, running away from his actual life. 8 years of his life, worth of hours spread across his life, is spent on escaping from his pain.
According to recent survey studies, 69% of American males age 13 and up use spicy materials at least occasionally, and 51% use it monthly or more. And we know that in these types of survey data, there are people that even if it's an anonymous survey, they will be less compelled to answer truthfully in questions that they feel shame about. So these numbers might actually be even less than what is actually true at this time. 1 in 10 men view spicy materials daily. Men are 5 times more likely than women to encounter spicy things daily and 4 more likely to actively search for it. Spicy materials are no longer a fringe behavior. They are becoming a male epidemic, and it's preventing us from having healthy interactions with our female counterparts as well as even each other, as these materials begin to be proliferated between man to man in messages. The gender gap is large, but we know that men are much more visually attuned and much more satiated by visual attractiveness in their female counterparts, and so it's no doubt that the female aspect of this has been transposed onto spicy materials that they would read. If you look at book talk for more than 5 minutes, you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. It is still a pervasive issue. However, we know that this industry, not only does it have victims, and we can see very readily what that looks like when the Epstein files release. There are a great many young people who are caught up in an industry that has done its best to destroy their souls. However, we also know that this is being used as sort of the male sedation hypothesis, which Chris Williamson talks about on Modern Wisdom, in that between spicy materials and video games, all of what makes men compelled and motivated to accomplish great things has been satiated within 5 seconds from their pocket. And so it's up to us to try to bring back the vigor that men have for pursuing goals. And perhaps if we did that, if we were able to restore any of that, we actually would not live in a society that has such a low threshold for protecting its children, that has such a low threshold for protecting each other and to do what is good, true, and beautiful. Let's restore the motivation to young men and see if we can regain some of what makes us great as men. Research has demonstrated that problematic spicy materials use has led to increased rates in anxiety, depression, and loneliness, and about 1/3 report feeling depressed most or all of the time. 36% feel lonely frequently versus 20% of people who only use spicy materials rarely. Researchers note that use may displace real-world relationship activities, and this will only get higher as the AI girlfriends start to come to fruition, and yes, even robotic prosthetics of females will become more common. Among spicy material users in one study, 33.8% of male users met criteria for problematic use, when that was only about 17% among female users. The high male use was also associated with greater psychological symptoms than anyone who used it rarely or not at all. As the age of exposure to spicy materials continues to decline, meaning that kids are exposed to it at an earlier and earlier age, that means that many boys are even in pre-puberty ways seeking out these encounters that they see online, and that it is framing the ways that they perceive the spicy and intimate acts that they would pursue later in life. And so it's beginning to set the temperature and create a culture of very powerfully and possibly even abusive conduct within intimate relationships. It risks training arousal away and relational intimacy away from the actual male in these questions.
Right? If you give a man a purpose and the ability to reach it, he will crawl over broken glass with a smile, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said it then and I say it again today. If men have a purpose and solutions and strength, they will endure anything. But he has to have that. And giving him sedation and numbing and doping him up and just comforting him right now kills him. It doesn't give him value.
Here are some of the hard truths that parents like myself will not want to hear. As a father of 4 children, I pray and I will be vigorous about trying to defend my children from this. However, among ages 13 to 17, in a recent survey, 8% used spicy materials daily, 18% used weekly, and 17% at least once monthly. Among ages 18 to 24, 12% were daily, 26% weekly, and 19% monthly. The researchers concluded that these groups are watching spicy materials and seeking it out more than any other generation.
You're not seeing it, and it's my belief that men are kind of being sedated out of their status-seeking and reproductive behavior with video games and porn. And this male sedation hypothesis basically squares the circle of high levels of male loneliness and sexlessness with young male syndrome. Like, how do these two things coexist? And it's because men are kind of being anesthetized out of this more action and aggression-based behavior.
Alden Young did some research very specific to the church and ministry-oriented approach to the spicy materials use online, and he found that 90% of teens and 96% of young adults were discussing using spicy materials with friends in neutral, accepting, or even encouraging ways. And we know that risk-taking behavior among boys is, of course, much more fervent than it is among young girls. And they used to take place in real life, IRL. Boys would jump off of things, get in fights. When I was growing up, we would play football and fight each other. That was part of what we did. There has been a moral reversal in the ways that this spicy materials and spicy material use is being seen among teens and young adults. Only 32% of teens or young adults say that viewing spicy materials is usually or always wrong, whereas 56% of them said that recycling is always wrong. That's a dramatic indicator of the cultural reprioritization of what it looks like to view and to be involved with spicy material addiction and use. Among those in ministry, 88% of pastors say that spicy material use is a major problem in their church, and only 7% of those pastors surveyed said that they actually run programs for addiction or even teaching about this type of spicy material. Awareness of the problem is obviously happening among these pastors, but interventions and real practical ways to implement change is not being addressed. Spicy material consumption among U.S. adults has risen from 55 to 61%, and researchers describe spicy material use as being more readily available and consumed by a larger audience than ever before. If you want to see how depraved this industry is, I would suggest you don't do a Google search, but some of the ownership, some of the proliferation, and some of the people who are involved in this racket are certainly not the types of people that you would want to be feeding it not only into your children's pockets, but you would not want to be feeding them with your dollars and cents. And that is exactly what we're doing, even if it's just our attention that we're giving to them. The statistics don't get much better when we look into people that report to have a Christian worldview. 64% of Christian men report viewing spicy materials at least once monthly. Among Christian men ages 18 to 30, 77% report doing it monthly, and 36% report viewing it daily. This challenges the assumptions that people with religiosity have some stabilizing force that allows them to curtail their spicy materials use. While there are some reasons for encouragement that we can repent, and God's grace is obviously offered, if we're facing facts, the reality is sitting in church and looking around the men that are attending with you, there's a high likelihood that a great many of them are participating in this industry and propping up this industry. If there were ever a position of defense and a bulwark against spicy materials getting worse in our society, it needs to be the Christian men who stand up and put a stiff arm out to it, because the moral framework necessary to refute these behaviors is not stable within secular society. There is no good reason in secular society for people to say no to this, and that's precisely the reason why the APA has not identified it as a diagnosable issue, because they would have to admit from their secular framework for some reason that people's bodies are sacred, and they're unwilling to do that. Spicy material online is no longer something we just stumble upon. It is a stumbling block for us, between us and God, between us and a safer society, and between us and the potential world where the things like the Epstein files that were just released would have the moral outrage, where all the names would come out, everyone would be prosecuted, and we would hold our arms around the victims of this type of behavior. But instead, we write a blank check to these companies who are using our young men against us, and really satiating what is their God-given desires for intimacy in access to from their pockets. And this is a moral evil that we must address. And as men of God, if we are not willing to stand up, no one will be. It is far past time that we protect our sons, and yes, even our daughters, from this incursion against us. And when the AI bots and AI girlfriends and boyfriends and partners come out even more fervently, we must have our defenses against it. If you would like to defend our children so that we can have a future society based in faith, fatherhood, and freedom, even freedom from spicy materials online, please like, share, and subscribe. I'd love your support.